Today, I'm going to be building something I never thought that I would actually get the chance to build. The new plastic Malcador for Solar Auxilia, which originally was only available through Forge World as a big kit. And I think it will make a really cool addition to my new burgeoning Steel Legion army. But I'm not even going to stop there. I'm going to turn this into a full diorama. I'm going to do custom tank commander and infantry sprawled and hiding over the back of the engine deck. I'm just going to start building because I'm really excited. Now, I thought one thing that would be worth talking about as I build this tank is why I'm doing this. And the fact is, because it's awesome. That's the only reason anyone should do anything in this hobby. It's to do something really cool. And a centerpiece model like this Malcador is the perfect opportunity to create something really unique for your army. Also, I'm absolutely obsessed with theme. So that's an issue, but one I refuse to work on. Anyway, I'm basically going to use this tank as a diorama. It's going to be a plinth, a glorified plinth for all this infantry to sit on the back of and make look pretty. And something I really want to do is tie this tank down into the environment. And I don't mean by just adding some mud around the tracks. I want to make this tank look lived in, lived around, fought with. And I'm going to do that by putting infantry all over the back. And my goal and challenge here is to really make it look like they're interacting with the tank, not just T-posing on top of the cupola. And my initial thoughts as I'm putting this together is that it's not as wide as I thought, but it's definitely long. So I think I'm going to have ample room to place a few infantry along the back of the engine deck. But also working out what fits is half the fun here. And I'm really not going to know until I finish building. I'm a little ways through building this now, and I have to say, I like these new tank builds. I wasn't really sure at the start whether it was a good kit or I just had familiarity from building the Imperialis Malcadors, but I think these are genuinely actually really well made. I really like the notch tabs that you put the two sides of the hull track guards together. They actually go together and hold a little bit. They don't just wobble everywhere and you have to hold it for 10 minutes as it dries, you know, with the glue. But these new sponson designs are very nifty. I like it. I'll see how much I like it when I have to paint it and get around all the moving parts. There was no warping or issues with that. Usually it's a bit fiddly to get things to go together, but no, it's just all lined up and there's nice tabs to help you. A pretty good kit so far. So, huzzah. So I've nearly finished building the bulk of the chassis, and I'm up to the part where I get to choose weapons now and actually stick them on. I've thought about it a little bit, and I'm going to go for the Malcador Annihilator. Ideally, I'd love to use the big Vanquisher cannon, big gun on big tank. But it, in fact, is not an option in 40k. The tank gun does not exist. So I had the option of the Malcador with the battle cannon, or I can have the Annihilator with the twin las cannon and the demolisher cannon. So that's what I'm going to go with. All right, we've done it. All the guns are on and we are finished. It is time to start adding all the little crew, aka my Steel Legion, who are going to be piggybacking on the back of the tank on this engine deck here. So I've got a little bit of real estate to work with here. Effectively, I want them to be hunkering down behind this big hard case mount here, popping shots off. Maybe even one like that's been hit and he's bleeding out against this this oil drum here. That'd be really cool. Basically, all the instructions parts are done and it's time to throw them in the bin and start working from pure imagination. And this is where the fun begins. So let's go. It's time for my Acadia Stands box to make its appearance so I can use the body parts from that as the basis of my Steel Legion and plonk them down, and then I can use all the green stuff later. So let's tuck into that. Here, hold this, will you? This box has been great for my little projects. However, I feel that I'm going to rapidly run out of everything in this, so I'm going to have to restock at some point. However, until then, I'm going to have a bit of fun. I've also got all my old Imperial Guard bits, including some Cupola commanders. Also, if I want someone sitting down, I do have some of the old Sentinel pilots, so I could use some of his legs, hack them apart a bit. I'll cross that bridge when it comes to it, but until then, I'm going to play around with some infantry. Now I definitely want a soldier that's going to be peering around or braced up against the superstructure. I think that'll be really, really nice. However, I'm going to have to find a body that actually works for that. And I've got a couple of ideas, but I think there's a pose of one of them running forwards. And with that lean, maybe I can use him to brace against the side of the slope tank. Somehow, by some miracle, just fits in nicely, perfectly looking to the side here. He's just here, he's just poking out, and it's glorious. Okay, he fits perfectly, and now I can start sculpting him into an actual Steel Legion, adding all the gubbins. And I'm going to breeze through a fair bit of this, so if you really want to know how I do this in depth, I highly recommend checking out my video on recreating my Steel Legion. And to help you out, I'll put a link in the description. Click here! And now it's time to address the really big shoulder pad that has appeared on one side of him. That is because I'm going to do something special here. This is going to be the first one of my iron coats that I make in this scale. That's right, I'm going to make an iron coat, and it's not even going to be a playable one. But I'm going to make one of my special veterans and put him on this tank, as I think it makes sense that one of my veterans will be protecting this tank, this relic from bygone eras. And so there's a perfect opportunity to, one, create a little bit of extra narrative, and also to work as a tester for when I actually do a whole squad for real. Sometimes the green stuff is fine. Sometimes it just does not behave. Stay there, you bugger. There we go. So once I've gone about doing all the standard things, putting on the gas mask and such, I'm going to start adding extra material. Literally, I'm going to start adding this big impact-absorbing trench coat that is going to help them survive and represent carapace armor, which doesn't technically exist in Imperial Guard anymore. It's all Castrican, but I'll deal with that later. They may just eventually count as Canadian shock troopers or Death Corps Krieg, and the extra armor will just help differentiate them from the rest of the army. However, it is also unnecessary to create an entire new greatcoat over the rest of his body. I'm only effectively going to do the tail coats around his legs and the collar around his shoulders. The arms and the rest of the body I'm actually going to leave untouched and just paint it like it's the coat. And now that this green stuff is done, it's time to put him aside and start working on the next individual. Now for the second soldier, I want to display him on the other side of the tank. So regardless of which angle you're looking at the tank from, you're going to have a nice infantryman to look at. So I need a little man to fit on this side of the tank, and after a little bit of dry fitting, quickly determined that I couldn't have someone poking his gun over the top of the tank and firing forwards, as it's just a little bit too tall for him, and I could easily remedy this by giving him a box. However, I had another idea and I like this much more, so I'm going to go with that. And that is to have this guy ducking away from incoming fire and holding on to the back of the ammo bin. So I'm going to look for a soldier with a braced stance and find a gun that he's holding in one hand so I can have the other held up and sort of placed against the side of the tank. So he's sort of bracing himself so it doesn't fall off the tank. I'm going to start green stuffing him as well. And just behind me, Jen has been experimenting with the Tamiya epoxy putty instead of green stuff. So I decided to give it a go as well. And I'm going to experiment with the putty on this model, see how I like it. As green stuff has some pros, but definitely some cons as well. And my discoveries are this putty is very soft. It's kind of like chewed chewing gum. It is quite nice and easy to push around. You don't need to drag it like green stuff. However, it is very susceptible to gravity and will droop a lot. So it really isn't working for me for like the tail coats. So I'm just gonna have to redo those in green stuff. However, the softness and the easy malleability of this putty really allowed me to fill out the gap left in the back of this guy from where I removed the backpack, and I really like it for doing the gloves, so I'm going to keep doing that in the future. So it was definitely worth trying it after all. And there, another man done. So far, I'm 2 for 2 and nothing has gone wrong yet, so I'm going to see if I can keep this up. So I think I'll work on the tank commander next. Okay, tank commander, tank commander. To be honest, I think this guy is going to be a lot easier to make, as I actually have a few tank commanders that are supposed to sit in a cupola. I considered using the Solar Auxiliary guy that actually comes with the kit, but he doesn't really suit the vibe of a Steel Legionnaire, even if he's tank crew. So I'm going to use one of the older models and add some new components. And immediately I was drawn to the Vox operator. He sort of got that helmet under padding on his head, as well as a pair of headphones, and he's got a hand that's sort of interacting with it all, which really helps in deciding what he's going to be doing on top of the tank. I did consider having him mount the pintle mounted Stormbolter or something, but I decided that would just visually get in the way of him, and I'd really like to show him off. I'm doing this mostly for visual flair. I'm having far too much fun to be worried about game rules right now. So boop, boop, boop. It goes together quite nicely actually, considering that they're actually 2 different scaled kits. But I made it work and we have another one done. Time to move on to the last soldier. And now for something completely different. We've got 3 guys that are in fairly good health. I'm going to make one that isn't. Having a wounded soldier slumped against the fuel drum at the end of this tank was honestly the first thing I thought of as I finished this tank. It's a great use of space and it's a really evocative image, I think. So all I need to do is make a soldier from a miniature range where everyone is in pretty good health be dying on the floor. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through all the sprues I have and try and find someone who is kneeling or crouching. And luckily, I found exactly that because there are heavy weapons teams in this Fall of Cadia box. And I was honestly expecting that I'd have to finagle the legs around and make it look really natural, but just putting the two halves of the legs together worked absolutely perfectly. So together it goes, and the first change I'm going to do is to the body, as I want the soldier to be sitting up just a bit more as he's lying against the drum. So I'm going to use clippers and hack away at the body until it's sitting up at a nice angle, something that looks fairly realistic and like he's actually having his entire body supported by this drum he's leaning against. And I was really expecting the next challenge to be finding two arms that had nothing to do with combat. However, once again, the heavy weapon sprue provided. The left arm is actually designed to go with the kneeling down pose, but instead of bracing kneeling, he's really just sort of struggling to sit up. And for the other arm, that's from the big weapons commander, where it's sort of flung forwards dramatically, giving the order to give someone in that direction a bad day. But if I angle that arm down just a little bit, his open hand just happens to rest upon his knee, sort of gently cupping it in one area. And unfortunately, mate, that area is exactly where you're going to receive a bullet hole. I'm sorry. And after that, I'm going to fill the hole in his bottom using more putty, and we can start the rest of the sculpting. This is going to proceed more or less exactly the same as the other individuals, except his fatigue's pulled aside as he has inspected his own chest and his impending doom. Otherwise, it's simply a matter of sculpting his clothes like he's sitting down against something. So I'm going to have one of his tailcoats splaying out against the ground, or engine deck in this case. And finally, all of my crewmen are complete, and I am so happy with how much character I've managed to inject over 4 individuals. All right. I'm calling that done. I have finished sculpting. No more. It's time to go do something different. Stretch my legs and paint a tank. Let's go. Whee! Now once I'd primed the tank black, as I wanted all the nice black lines in the recesses to keep those shadows, I decided to do something that I have never done with vehicles before, and that's to actually put the color down using an airbrush. I have seen so many pictures on the internet of people who have airbrushed their tanks, and they do this really nice gradient within each panel, and it's almost like reverse highlighting, where towards the edges it gets darker, and then later you go in and line highlight so you get this really nice effect. So I'm gonna give that a try because it looks amazing. So I grabbed a cold gray color, and instead of just zenithaling the entire model at once, I worked from panel to panel, first giving a general pass over to raise the color up from black, and then focusing on each individual surface. This was exceptionally quick and efficient, and if you're going to do a lot of tanks for an army, I would highly recommend doing this. Yo, airbrushing tanks is fun. Why don't I do this more often? There we go. That looked great. Time to do all the camo patterns. Let's find khaki. Previously in my old army, I had used a bone color just to stipple across the entire tank, but I think that's lacking just a little bit of vibrancy, so I'm going to use more of a yellow this time to really get that sandy effect. And instead of using a crappy throwaway brush, I'm going to use a nice Artist Opus dry brush, which I'm really getting fond of. And while I'm going to be fairly free in how I apply this, I am going to try and make sure that the tank is still about 2/3 gray. And with that done, it's time to highlight all of the panels. And to do that, I'm going to keep using this dry brush, but move up to a more parched bone color. And I'm going to apply this all over the tank, even in the gray areas, as the bone will still work as a good highlight color for the gray, but it will really help to unify the entire tank. But thankfully, that's the bulk of everything done, and now I can just work on all the details, starting by painting all the tracks and other metallic areas all black. I'm going to paint the exhausts brass, the fuel drum on the back I'll pick out in a fairly military green, the tracks will get a splash of silver, I'll add a bit of visual flair to the missile on the side, and I will pick out all the lenses on the front, including the big spotlight on top. And then when that's done, it's time for the really laborious part, and that's going over every single rivet using this wash. I'm going to make sure I work it into every crack and crevice. But it doesn't end there, I can add even more details in the form of freehand and markings. So I'm going to divide one of the panels on the side of the tank, and I'm going to paint it white and red to tie in with the Steel Legion heraldry that they typically have on the sides of their tanks. Then when that's done, I'm going to hopefully pull out some calligraphy skills and do some freehand on the side of the tank as well. I'm honestly playing pretty fast and loose here. I hadn't thought of anything beforehand. So 62, the designated number of my regiment, is going on one side, and on the other side, death before fear. I think that's suitably grimdark and probably written by someone who doesn't actually have to go out and fight that day. So that's going on one side, and I'll add a couple of extra things. Anger on one side and smite on the other. There we go. And we're nearly done, but not quite. The tank is just looking a little bit clean, and for living on a very dusty, sandy planet, I think it could do with just a bit more weathering. So I'm gonna grab some desert pigments and apply those liberally all over the tracks, the sides of the tank, and also the front of the hull around the dozer blade, as that's where a lot of sand will naturally build up. And with that addition, the tank is finally complete, and I can start working on the 4 little guys that I built earlier and paint them up nicely. Now, when it comes to painting my Steel Legion, over the years, I've developed a very earthy and saturated appearance that I really enjoy. So I'll paint their fatigues in a really nice ochre color and apply a deep, rich brown to pretty much all the rest of the model, whether it's leathers, armor, or metallics. And that's because I want this brown to be a base coat that shows through all the colors I'm gonna put on top of them. The armor is gonna get an overbrush of a military green, while the metal is gonna get the same in, well, you guessed it, metal. Then I'm going to do all of my shading using 2 washes, namely a rich orange over all the fatigues, and over all the rest of the model is going to be a black, aka Nuln oil. And then when that's dried, I can apply all my layer highlights and fun little details. It's pretty simple, but if you want to know more in-depth details on how I did everything, you can check out my older video on Steel Legion, in which I go into much more depth in how I painted everything. The links for that should be on the screen or in the description. However, there is one thing different this time around, and that is that I'm painting one of my iron coats. And to paint the iron coat itself, I simply used a nice dark blue gray that I then applied the Nuln oil over it, along with the rest of the model, so I get it all done in one shot. Then I'm going to add just a little bit of bone color into the mix, just to lighten it up as if I'm highlighting leather. And now it's simply a matter of applying all those final highlights and details. All right, the infantry is painted, the tank is painted, now I just need to put them together. So I'm going to take the infantry off their little bases, and I'm going to start gluing them onto the tank and finally create that diorama.
Murray has made a model. Murray is assembling that model. Go Murray, go! Go Murray!
As my brand new Malcador rotates majestically in front of you, I want to take this time to thank all of our patrons. It's your continued support that allows us to create projects such as this. And if you're interested in joining our patron community, you can find the links in the description, which will gain you access to our mini Discord channel. Here you can chat with us directly about your hobby, what you're up to, and even take part in our monthly mini review, in which you can request a bit of advice or critique from us or the rest of the Discord members. It's always a great time to see what the patrons have been up to, and it's definitely a highlight of our month. So once again, if you're interested in supporting us, the links for our Patreon are in the description, as well as links to our merch store. And there we have it. It's done, it's complete, and it's amazing. Usually I have an idea of how something's gonna turn out, but this was far better than I could have predicted. Oh, this is so cool. And the dude dying on the back looks so good. I've never used that sentence before in my life, and I probably never will again, but it's awesome. I really enjoyed this, and I've had so much fun working on this model. It's so good. I've got an iron coat finally. I'm gonna have to build so many things for this army. It's crazy. It's not even a concept anymore. It just needs to be a whole force. Anyway, here's my Malcador. I'm so happy with it. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this as well, and especially if you are enjoying this new format we're trying, where we get to put more effort into our weekend videos, and we do a more of a chatty Tuesday video. And hopefully you're also enjoying this new flow. Again, let us know, and until then, we'll see you next week. All right, that's enough. I'm gonna go put this down and admire it some more.